For more insight, we are speaking now with Greg Fealy. He's Emeritus Professor of Department of Political and Social Change at the Australian National University. Professor Fealy, thank you very much for joining us. I would like to start with your take on the last televised debate, which seemed more reserved than previous debates. And which candidate do you think outperformed the other?
It was certainly a much more amicable debate than the previous presidential debate. We know from polling that was undertaken by Kompas, one of the most respected media organisations in Indonesia, a telephone poll done immediately after the debate, had all three candidates fairly close, but Anies Baswedan, a narrow winner on the three criteria that they were asking about. But I think the important thing here is the previous debate was quite an ill-tempered, uncongenial debate, particularly where we had both Ganjar and Anies Baswedan really attacking Prabowo Subianto on his record and having quite sharp questioning of him. And he responded poorly to that. He was quite irritated by the questioning and at times seemed angry and didn't even want to acknowledge Anies Baswedan. And the feeling is that a lot of voters didn't like seeing that side of Prabowo. And so what we saw in this debate was a much softer, more measured version of Prabowo's political persona. And particularly interesting was his closing apology, not only to his other two candidates, but also to the Election Commission for anything that he and his team may have done that they didn't find particularly pleasant. So he was going all out, I think, to portray himself as, once again, a very responsible, a very self-controlled leading candidate for the presidency.
Prof. Fealy, we were talking to our Indonesia correspondent earlier this hour, and he basically said that the frontrunners, Prabowo and Gibran, are at mid-40s, not quite clearing the 50% hurdle. Is that your take on the situation as well, meaning we will see a June runoff?
That's right. It's looking, the closer we get to the election day, and with the polls continuing to be around that mid-40% range, it looks like Prabowo and Gibran will fall just short of getting the necessary majority on the 14th of February. They are the reliable polls. We have some polls that are less well regarded that have Prabowo virtually with 50%. But I think most of us feel as if he could well fall 3, 4, 5% short of that target. And so we're very likely to have a runoff. And the polls, the majority of the polls are suggesting that Anies Baswedan is a little bit ahead of the other candidate, Ganjar, so he is likely to be the runoff candidate for Prabowo, which I think is something that will not necessarily please Prabowo and indeed President Jokowi, because Anies is a quite formidable campaigner, very articulate, but he's also shown in recent weeks that he's willing to be quite aggressive in his questioning of Prabowo, and it could be quite a challenge for the Prabowo team in how to manage that.
And Professor, what are the main issues, the key issues that Indonesian voters are looking for in 2024 elections, especially younger generation who make up over half of the voters in the country? And which candidate do you think is in the strong position to deliver?
Well, one of the key things running in Prabowo's favour has been the barely disguised support from President Jokowi for his candidature. And this has been evident for much of the last year. And certainly the last 6 months, Jokowi has really intervened repeatedly to assist Prabowo. And of course, Jokowi's own son, Gibran, Rakabuming Raka, is Prabowo's running mate. One of the things that makes Jokowi's support for Prabowo so potent is the fact that Jokowi is enjoying near record levels of public support, around about the 80% range. And a lot of that comes back to how people feel he's managed the economy well, and the country is doing well. There's no major crisis issues for Indonesia at the moment. It's relatively orderly, and people largely applaud the policies that Jokowi has put forward. One of the interesting things that Anies Baswedan has been trying to do is run on a change agenda, and that's very difficult when so much of the voting public is happy with the direction of the current government. But nonetheless, I think he's succeeded to some extent in raising a more critical set of attitudes towards how Jokowi has governed and whether the country could be more equal. There are a lot of inequalities of wealth. There are a lot of questions about political interference in bureaucratic processes and things like that. So that will be interesting to see if Jokowi's popularity falls if we go into an extended second round for the presidential election.
Prof. Fealy, some reports indicate that the cabinet right now is split because of the unhappiness over some of the issues you mentioned with election eligibility. Are investors in the markets a little bit concerned, about which direction the country is going to be taking, particularly, since we're hearing about the possible resignation of the finance minister, who is very highly regarded?
Yes, I've heard the rumours. I've no idea whether they're true that Sri Mulyani would consider resigning. That would be a major blow to Jokowi's credibility. But there are a great many rumours, and I think some of them quite well sourced in Jakarta, that a lot of senior ministers are very unhappy with the president's intervention into the electoral process in recent months. The Constitutional Court decision last November that allowed Gibran to run, that created this loophole for him to run in the campaign, I think in particular, a lot of people found difficult to accept. It seemed very much at odds with the Jokowi whom they had been working so hard to support over the last best part of a decade. So for investors, though, Prabowo is promising that he will be continuing. He's a continuity candidate, that he will be perpetuating Jokowi's policies. He's praised them at every turn. The key aspects of those policies, things like downstreaming, the broad infrastructure emphasis that Jokowi has, the developmentalism of Jokowi, are all things that Prabowo says that he will continue. And one assumes that if Jokowi's son, Gibran, is elected as vice president, he will also be trying to safeguard his father's legacy. So all those things would be reasonably reassuring, I think, for international business. The one thing I would say that there is an element of uncertainty and indeed anxiety regarding Prabowo. People have known him in the past to have a very volatile temperament and to very quickly have flashes of anger in which he can make statements or order actions to be taken that really would cause concern to people. So I think there's a continuing question about whether the very measured public impression that he's given in the last 4.5 years as Defence Minister, whether that is something that will continue to be the case when he is the top man, when he is the president, and there are much less constraints on him than has been the case until now.
Understood. Prof. Fealy, we do have to go. We thank you so much for your insights. That was Professor Greg Fealy from the Department of Political and Social Change at the Australian National University. Thank you so much. And we will have more coverage on Indonesia's upcoming election on our website, cna.asia, including this story on the debate over using AI for political purposes.